I'm Karen Hartglass. You are listening to It's All About Food. Big day today. I hope you have your thinking caps on because your brain is going to get challenged in a good way. And I hope you start thinking in ways you haven't thought before in a good way. I have with me a dear, dear friend and colleague, Lee Hall, who holds an LLM in environmental law with a focus on climate change and has taught law as an adjunct at Rutgers, Newark, and at Widener, Delaware Law. Lee is an author, public speaker, and creator of the Studio for the Art of Animal Liberation on Patreon. I've spoken with Lee before. The last time was when the book came out on their own terms, Animal Liberation for the 21st Century. And Lee and I recently reconnected because I was informed that this book is now available free and open to everyone as an abridged audio version of the original book. This is exciting. I'll include a link on this podcast page. But we have a lot to talk about because Lee is a great thinker. We're lucky to hear some of Lee's thoughts today. Welcome, Lee, to It's All About Food.
Aaron, thank you so much for that beautiful introduction and your beautiful friendship. Delighted to be here.
So one of the things that I miss is the Veggie Pride Parade, because that was an opportunity to see you, however brief, but we could look in each other's eyes, maybe have a hug, and just acknowledge you are here doing good things, and thank you. And the Veggie Pride Parade stopped, not just because of COVID, unfortunately. The founder, the organizer of the event, had some very different political ideas relative to most of the people that participated in that event. And the conversation got a little ugly. And so it is no more, at least here in New York. But it had its moments.
It had its moments.
It's good moments.
Yes.
I have learned a lot from you, and I plan on continuing to learn a lot from you. What's interesting is for humans, and I really can only speak for myself, but we're formed by our upbringing, by our society, by our culture, by our experiences. That framing sometimes is not really in our best interest, in our interest for ourselves, for the planet, for other life on Earth. And some of us are able to see beyond. I find that travel has really helped me when I get to see other cultures and different countries. We realize that there's just a lot of different things going on. At least for me, it really opened my mind and my heart. You have opened my mind to a lot of thoughts. And today we're going to start with the idea of personhood. And I think you suggested 30 years of personhood.
30 years of personhood.
Of non-human personhood.
Of non-human personhood. That would date back to when they were preparing the book, The Great Ape Project, which was published in 1993. So they would have all the authors who worked on The Great Ape Project, Equality Beyond Humanity, would have been putting it together right now 30 years ago. And of course, Peter Singer was a key proponent of the Great Ape Project, became the president of a group that followed after the book, and has now, 30 years later, become an amicus in the case for the happy elephant at the Bronx Zoo. So Peter Singer is named in the case of personhood that we're all talking about now, because yesterday, the highest court in the state of New York decided against Stephen Wise's case and a number of other advocates working on the Non-Human Rights Project. The court decided that Happy the Elephant is not a person for the purpose of a habeas corpus petition to remove Happy from the Bronx Zoo to a sanctuary.
Okay, few questions. What was the Great Ape Project?
The idea was that there are several great apes. In addition to the human great ape, there are several non-human great apes, and they would be the chimpanzees and the bonobos, who used to be called the pygmy chimpanzees until scientists realized that they were their own community. So we have the chimpanzees, the bonobos, the gorillas, and the orangutans. And these four groups were classified by the Great Ape Project as the non-human great apes. And their call was to the United Nations and public opinion that these particular groups, these particular non-human ape communities, should be entitled to rights within the ambit of human rights, rights tantamount to human rights because of their extraordinary capacities, the cognitive capacities that we as humans relate to very well. So in other words, because they're a lot like us. At the time, I was introduced in the 90s to the Great Ape Project. I was a law student getting my first degree, which is just a general law degree. And I was taken with it immediately because there wasn't a lot out there in the 90s. And this seemed to be, if you wanted to do legal rights for animals, this seemed to be where the work was. So I wrote a model brief for the Supreme Court on personhood. The plaintiff in my model brief was Evelyn Hart, a chimpanzee, and I worked through this throughout law school. And there was no animal law at the University of Maryland in the 90s. There might be now, but there wasn't then. And so I found an empathetic constitutional law professor who agreed with me that during my second and third year of law school, I would work on an independent study for credit to produce this work. And another law professor at the same school, Tony Waters, who taught property law as well as criminal law. So the property was very important to this professor. And Tony decided to get heavily involved in this. Although Tony wasn't my mentor, my professor for this independent study, Tony was so excited about it. And so it turned into a co-authored piece with a law professor at my law school on why this particular non-human great ape should have constitutional personhood. Now, going through the work of doing this, I was able to speak with other law professors, Cass Sunstein, Lawrence Tribe, well-known, really the most well-known constitutional law scholars writing in the country. Of course, I met Peter Singer and Jane Goodall. I learned, the learning curve was very fast and quite deep. This was my obsession through law school and beyond. And two things about this. One is that my work on it convinces me that it can be done. I do think that non-human personhood it can fit into human constitutional law. I don't question that. I guess the second thing that came out of that is that it led me to teaching for a few years in animal law. I co-taught a course developed by Gary Francione and Anna Charlton at Rutgers. That led me to think more and more about this. So I eventually stopped working as an immigration lawyer, where I worked in a firm outside Baltimore, and I started teaching, and then eventually wound up working for Friends of Animals, which is an animal organization, an animal interest advocacy group that looks at habitat as the real proper setting for animal interests and for how you advocate for animal interests. So I've had a great education in this field, and I think it can work. I've now actually, ever since the beginning, ever since I started working on the case, I also had misgivings about working on the case. And I think that the misgivings really came to be articulated when I found this.
Okay, this is the
Catherine McKinnon's essay. This book is called Women's Lives, Men's Laws. And Catherine McKinnon is also a very well-known law professor, does a lot in international law, and does a great deal on women's rights and human rights. Writing on animal law, how interesting, for one of the leading scholars in the world. I think Catherine McKinnon is on women's rights the most cited law professor. And here is what Professor McKinnon says about animal law. What is called animal law has been human law, the laws of humans on or for or about animals. These are laws about humans' relations to animals. Who asked the animals? References to what animals might have to say are few and far between. Do animals dissent from human hegemony? I think they often do. They vote with their feet by running away. They bite back, scream in alarm, withhold affection, approach warily, fly and swim off. But this is interpretation. How to avoid reducing animal rights to the rights of some people to speak for animals against the rights of other people to speak for the same animals needs further thought.
Wow.
So, of course, I realized at that point that what was I doing with this Supreme Court brief, right? I was speaking for animals. I would find that anytime we're working on animal advocacy, that comes up over and over. Right? This, which advocacy group is right? Which advocacy group is more right? And you would find sanctuaries arguing with each other over which one was more humane, was more accommodating to the needs of the animals there. Now, in this case that we're talking about, non-human rights Project versus Brahini, which is the Brong-Su case. The question is, should Happy the elephant be released to a sanctuary? And it seems like the leading sanctuary is one in California. And it's described as a very spacious sanctuary. But, you know, were this case to have prevailed, right? We're happy to go to the sanctuary. What would happen is you get other cases like this. And of course, Stephen Wise is going into another case like this in California, I believe for an elephant, and has several chimpanzee cases on various burners, right? And so the idea is, let's get personhood. Let's have a judge deem a non-human being a person, and that way we can get animals out of situations where they'll be used and into sanctuaries. And from my work being on a board of a sanctuary at one time, I see the conflict among sanctuaries, and I can just imagine what kind of competition there will be for, you know, who gets to this or that elephant, who has the right to become unfortunately, the keeper, the next keeper of the elephant. Because the truth is, and I think all sanctuaries should say this, and one chapter of On Their Own Terms, Animal Liberation for the 21st Century. It's called Taking Animal Welfare Seriously. And it's about this. It's about if you're a sanctuary, you do have the standing to call yourself a welfare group. You have the standing to use the word welfare properly, unlike, say, Kentucky Fried Chicken, who might come out with welfare standards, right? But they don't have the standing to use the word welfare. Sanctuaries do. At the same time, when they have tours, when they're teaching people about the importance of sanctuary, are they saying this spacious sanctuary is on, and I'll give you an example. There's a nearby sanctuary in Chester County, Pennsylvania, where I am. The name of it is Chenoa Manor. And I talk about this in the audiobook. It's run by a veterinarian named Rob Teddy. And if you go on a tour of the sanctuary, you are told, this is very important, this sanctuary shouldn't be here. This was the land of the Lenni Lenape people. This was the land of the wolves. Should we have a situation where we're doing basically animal husbandry work on the land that we took from others? And so the question becomes, how do we stop putting animals in the position where they're going to need space, where they're going to need handling regulations, where they're going to need our care in the first place? Let's ask some deeper questions. And then Rob said, and I interviewed Rob for my book, and I started talking about rescue, of course, because Rob runs a sanctuary, a farm animal sanctuary. And Rob says, I don't use the word rescue. And I said, why not? And Rob said, because it gives the aura that we are these saviors who are swooping down, picking up the animal in distress off the railroad tracks, right? We're coming to the animal in distress saviors. And Rob said, no, we are not. We're in this situation where basically if you've created a fire and you go and take somebody and save their life after you're the arsonist, you really don't get credit for rescuing them. You know? So Rob said it's arrogant. The word rescue is arrogant. And this is the kind of questioning and thinking rescue societies, refuges, I think need to be involved in. So I think that we need to hear from the rescue community questions about what we're doing to stop animals from being put in vulnerable positions in the first place. And that gets to the question of where animal, you could call it rights, I would prefer to call it animal liberation, where we're really working for it. And we're really working for it when we work on to defend animals and habitat, free living animals, animals who are not put in the position of needing rescue and handling standards. Everything with Happy's case, if Happy were to have won, or if Happy stays at the Bronx Zoo, either way, the Bronx Zoo may be, and I'm not arguing that 1 acre is too small. I'm not arguing against that. They're right. Move Happy to a sanctuary. I'm all for it. But to call it personhood, to call it freedom, there's a problem with that, because an imposed sanctuary imposed on the land of California using water, right, in California right now. I mean, that is not free. That is another form of sprawl. It's a benign. We're trying to do the right thing, but what are we doing to make sure that we no longer own animals and that they no longer need rescue? That would be the locus of animal liberation and of true animal rights.
I imagine that this is an uncomfortable conversation for many people. Sanctuaries in general, especially for vegans, are good places that are doing good work. And in a capitalistic society, most of them, if not all of them, have to fundraise, have to make money in order to support what they're doing. It's difficult, I imagine, to really stay clear of the mission when you have to continually be raising money.
And that is why you'll hear sanctuaries say things like, it's heaven on earth. This is heaven on earth for once abused and mistreated animals. Animals could not possibly be happier. And they are at such and such sanctuary, the one that we're fundraising for. That dynamic causes activists to talk of sanctuaries as though they're a paradise. The animal has everything they need there. The animals have everything they need there. They've got comfort. And it even gets to the point where advocates look at that as the perfect paradigm of how animals can live on this earth. That would be what's better. And I've heard advocates say that their dream is a world where we can all hug pigs and pet cows and go visit them. And so the ideas get very mixed up, because is that really the ideal? What you're talking about? I mean, I used to be involved in working and teaching in immigration and refugee law, and I can recognize a refugee. And these are refugees.
Yeah.
These are beings who will never go back to freedom. And some of them will have good, humane standards where they're in the refuges, but they're still refugees, and their life, their future, every decision that's made for them is going to depend on decisions made by humans, as Catherine McKinnon says, speaking on behalf of other animals. It doesn't recognize animals on their own terms.
We have a long way to go. I'm thinking of doctors or healthcare professionals talk about chronic diseases, and a few, not many, will say that these, maybe a particular disease that they're specializing in, can be completely reversed. And if we ate the proper whole food, plant-based diet, and if everybody did, this particular disease would be wiped out or something. And that's what they want to do. They want to go out of business, ultimately. And sanctuaries should want to ultimately go out of it. We shouldn't have to need to have sanctuaries, right? But we do need them. And they're not helping the mass of animals that we exploit. They're just a small amount, kind of a token, so that we can go and visit and see and learn. And back to Happy and personhood. I've had Steve Wise on the program. I've gone to some of his lectures. I know this is his life's mission, just to get one non-human animal to be considered a person. So many questions I have, but just to begin with, if a non-human animal is given personhood, what does that mean?
If a non-human animal is given personhood, what does that mean? In the case of the plaintiff who I wrote about, who is a fictional character, by the way, a composite of a number of chimpanzees I knew and met because of my work with sanctuaries, particularly one sanctuary, I should name it. The Fauna Foundation in Canada was a sanctuary that I visited, and I met a number of chimpanzees, and I felt that I got to know them as persons. So that was important because I have no doubt, of course, they're persons. They are all at a refuge being cared for. They have a good situation there. They have people who love them. They have people who certainly consider them persons. They have the television on. And they have pizzas and they're confined. And they will never have the choice or the chance to forge these wide-ranging miles and miles and miles of relationships that they would have had in West Africa had they never been taken away. In Happy's case, the same, right? Happy, I don't know Happy, but I understand that Happy was born in Thailand and taken away 1 year old, a toddler, basically, as an elephant. Other family members were killed. The being was taken away, brought into the United States, and several years later wound up at the Bronx Zoo. And in the same way, there's no way Happy will ever be able to go back to who Happy really is. The ancestral community in Thailand is taken away forever. And Happy will never get that back. In these kinds of situations, what would being a person mean? The best we can do for them is to bring them into the best possible sanctuary. That's what being a person means. I think that's a good thing, but it's ultimately a question of welfare in the good way, in the good sense that we were talking about, a question of rescue. Unfortunately, it's a question of handling. It's a question of human decisions. It's the legal personhood that lawyers are working with is limited in that crucial way. It doesn't give them back who they are, who they were, their community. They'll never get it back. They are always in a trap for their entire lives. That's the issue. I think that we could do better. I think that we could acknowledge that the animals that we know, that we've met, that we defend are persons. And then we can say, look, in the world as we know it, where we're dealing with climate change and we're dealing with sprawl and we're dealing with animal agribusiness and deforestation, taking out more and more of the planet, leaving tinier and tinier pockets for free living beings who live with their ancestral communities, the very thing we'd want to defend for them so that they can speak for themselves, right? That we're not speaking for them, right? We don't have to know what they're talking about. They're in their habitat doing their own thing, living their own lives. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Wouldn't that be a wonderful way to honor their personhood? I think that the case for personhood needs to be folded into an environmental case to protect and defend habitat so that they can have what they really, really should have. And I think it can be done.
I see where you're going. So maybe there should be some other word, like a transition to get to personhood, since we can't get there straightforward with the animals that have been confined right now. Ideally, we don't want to confine any of them, and then we wouldn't have to find a place to put them. For example, have you talked to Steve Wise about this?
Yes, a long time ago, many years ago.
Okay.
When I was a volunteer for the Great Ape Project. Okay. I think Steve is, as you said, laser focused on one particular thing.
Yeah, and he's made it very clear what his life mission is. And this is it.
I think when you're talking about looking for words to describe what's going on or what really would be the ideal of animal liberation thinking, again, going back to Catherine McKinnon, Professor McKinnon observed that the primary model of animal rights, quote, misses animals on their own terms, unquote. And I think we have to answer Professor McKinnon's call. And that's why I wrote the book, On Their Own Terms, Animal Liberation for the 21st Century. That is, if you're looking for one, that's not one word, but it's one phrase. And I think it's very important. And I think that it helps us recognize the difference between the case for a superior form of confinement, a more humane form of confinement on one hand, and on the other hand, animal liberation. So I don't see the personhood case that's going through the court dealing with the Bronx Zoo as an animal liberation case. But because an animal is not domesticated, it could be, right? If we talked about communities of elephants still living in Thailand, of which there are very, very few, and most of them are recruited to ride tourists around or to haul logs in Thailand. Right. That's what's going on there. Very few are left living on their own terms. I think that would be where you would go if you would deal with an animal liberation case. And interestingly enough, and I'm not defending where Happy lives in the Bronx Zoo, so I want to make this clear, but the Bronx Zoo has actually done something that's on the way to an animal liberation on that trajectory. And what they did was, in 2006, they said we're going to stop acquiring elephants.
Okay, very good. Let's applaud. Yeah,
right?
That's a step. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so about that step, that's a great step. How are we going to expand that step? Who's acquiring elephants? Who's still acquiring elephants? And what are we doing? Both on a domestic level and on an international level. What are we doing about that?
And it's not just elephants, it's all zoos that are confining animals. And that's just one piece of it. That's not our food system. That's not our medical system. This is just the zoos.
Absolutely. And you bring up a point that if we go one animal or one species at a time, actually in Happy's case, it appeared to be one animal at a time. The argument was made by the litigants that this isn't going to be a case of a slippery slope and the cows, and the mice. It's only about one elephant, one particularly bright elephant. They made that point. So this appears to be not only about just, one community of animals, but also only about one individual animal.
I know, I'm not sure why they decided to go that route, but that is not their long-term intent.
I get that. But when we're telling the media, well, this is only about one particularly intelligent being, it's not going to upend our relationship with other animals. When you're talking to the media and you tell them that, what's the normative cue there? You're suggesting that you don't really think that we should be talking about cows and mice and so forth, right? You're suggesting a hierarchy where there are particular animals that you have decided, in Happy's case, the self-recognition test using a mirror is part of the litigant's case, that Happy has what it takes to be a person, because one of the ways we define personhood is looking at their cognitive capacities, and the mirror test is a decided upon test that shows very few non-human beings have ever pulled it off. Happy pulled it off. Therefore, Happy deserves, and I'm putting deserves in quotes here, personhood. What is the normative cue there? What are we teaching people when we speak like this? My cat. I mean, the judges asked, well, is it going to be our dogs and cats, or, who else? Who's next? My cat. I mean, should we be, if I'm talking to the media and they will say, they ask me, well, what's next? Our cats? How should I respond? Now, if I were making a case for Happy and I was one of the litigants, I'd say, oh, no, we're not going to cats. Don't worry.
Don't worry.
Right? But I wouldn't say that. What I would say is my cats will never be free. They're the offspring of domesticated individuals. Once upon a time, way, way back there, their ancestors were free-living wildcats. There are some free-living wildcats on the face of the earth today. Because I love my cats, and I do love my cats, I have to ask myself, if I really love you and really respect you, what am I doing to preclude you being put in the position where you are on the streets needing to be rescued? What's the issue there? How did you get there needing rescue, right? How were you tied on the railroad tracks needing Dudley Do-Right, right? Because what's this about, right? Well, there are wildcats. And so the question is, dear media, yes, I'm concerned about cats. And the question is, what are we doing to stop the pet trade? First, let's adopt the offspring that do need us, right? Let's get them out of the shelters. I'm sorry to call them shelters when generally they're not. What are we doing? The ones that are put in the situation of distress, given that we did this to them, we owe them refuge. So what are we doing to help them? But then stop whatever it is that's putting them in this situation. And what is it? It's the breeding organizations, right? It's the whole idea that we should take wildcats and turn them into household friends or petable kind of toy-like. I mean, a lot of these breeding organizations look at these as beings to parade around in cat shows and to take out in your purse, right? The cats and the dogs.
Cute, cuddly, adorable little things that depend on you.
How terrible that we have taken wolves and wildcats and put them in these situations. So, dear media, what are we doing to defend the wolves and the wildcats who are still on the face of this earth, who need us to defend them? What are we doing about to challenge our right, our self-assigned right as human beings, our prerogative, to take them out of the wild, to selectively breed them, and to put them in our houses? And in fact, to go and buy cat food and dog food and fish food, etc., from malls that are built on the land that used to belong to the wolves, their ancestors, and free-living cats. Let's start questioning these things. That's where I would say let's start. I was involved in a legal case. Now, this wasn't a personhood case. It was defending deer at Valley Forge National Historical Park. And I was questioned by the media quite a few times, even by Fox News. Strangely enough, Fox News asks the most questions. So I was able to speak at length to Fox News. There you go. A lot of news stations didn't want to ask questions.
They didn't want to touch it.
They didn't want to touch it. So the interviewer said, well, how many deer do you think should be in the park? I mean, there are a lot of deer in the park. That's the National Park Service is saying there are too many deer in the park, and they're ruining the understory of the park. And obviously there are a lot of deer here. And what is your opinion? How many do you think need to be removed? And I said, well, I don't think any need to be removed. And they thought that was rather extreme. But I said, no, it's not, because the National Park Service is in a normative position. They're in the position where they can teach people about the natural predator-prey relationship, aren't they? They're in the position where they could say, as they know, there are coyotes living in this park. They knew it. They know it. And they are in the position where they could say, let's work with the Game Commission throughout the state of Pennsylvania, and let's stop the suppression of coyotes. Of course, these things are all connected, because why do human beings kill coyotes? Because they have chickens and other farm animals, right, that they want to protect and feed us. Yep. The animal products, right? Yep. So they're protecting the farms, and they're poisoning and trapping and snaring and shooting the coyotes. So yes, does this open a Pandora's box? Of course it does. I'm an animal liberationist. I have to open Pandora's boxes. I don't want to say, no, slippery slope. No. We're not interested in cats or deer or coyotes.
Well, clearly the problem is humans. We're the problem.
Do you think?
It's a situation of perspective, because most humans feel that we are superior and that we are in charge and have the power. It's a belief system that is very difficult to change. And I have many friends, colleagues who love their animals that they live with, their dogs and cats. Some of them are rescued from shelters. Some have been bred. They say they're part of their family, and they don't realize that most of them were taken away when they were babies from their mothers and their siblings to live with humans. It's crazy, just crazy.
Yeah, and in fact, in advocacy, you'll see these memes, right, and these slogans, and it will be, if you love some animals called pets, why do you eat other animals called dinner? Or if you love a dog, why would you wear a cow or eat a pig? I mean, they're good questions about cognitive dissonance, of course, but those questions are only understood to be problematic from the eating side, not the loving side. Is domestication love? Do we want a situation where it'd be okay if we stopped eating animals as long as we treated them in the way we treat pets? Many advocates, that's as far as their advocacy is going. That's their ideal. It gets us back to, yes, I think paradise would be where I'm petting cows. I'm not joking. That is going to a sanctuary to bring your kid to be able to pick up a pig and hug that pig. To some people, that's like, oh yeah, I love the animal movement. I love animal rights. This is how it should be. My friend in Humboldt County, California, Valerie McGowan, who is done a lot of great work with Black Vegans Rock and some other projects, asked me, okay, but look, now if it's taking tens of thousands of years to get ourselves in a situation where we are live and breathe dominion. We are in charge of other animals. Now, if that's taken us thousands of years, and it's ingrained in us. I'm not saying it can't be reversed, but wouldn't it take hundreds of years? I go into, and this gets us back to, can this be done? Where would we put these kinds of cases? What is our kind of worldview going to look like? The book called Wild Law by Cormac Cullinan, an Irish writer. So it's not about US law, but it's relevant. Wild Law. And in that book, Cullinan, it's not written by a vegan, but there's a section in there that I think is important, because Cormac Cullinan is saying that, yes, we can do things with law that will work to respect the natural world. It can be done. And at one point, Cullinan talks about Thomas Kuhn's idea of the paradigm shift. And this was introduced in the 1960s by Thomas Kuhn, who talked about it as a transformation in scientific understanding, so that humans would get a more coherent perspective than we had before. And a paradigmatic paradigm shift is the Copernican revolution. When we acknowledge that our planet revolves around the sun, that we're not the focal point of creation anymore, once we understood that something that seemed obvious and eternal was suddenly an outdated thought. Not suddenly, it took when people were put under house arrest for thinking it, but it relatively quickly in the course of human history, humanity's perspective changed. And now we know that we're not the center of the universe, right? And I think that in the same way, the vegan principle challenges this old view, and you just articulated it, that we all are brought up with, that we're central and everything and everyone revolves around us. And can we challenge it? Yes, because biologists have known for some time, and they've been telling us that earthworms and beings and supposedly other insignificant beings actually play a remarkably influential role in the biocommunities, in the lives around us, in our own lives. And now we know this, right? And when we go into veganism, vegans are saying we're not going to exploit other beings. As humans, we're not going to accept the supremacy. We want to lose that mantle. And we're not going to rank other beings based on their cognitive capacities or anything else. We're not going to impose a moral rank on them. They're all here to live on their own terms, bees and earthworms included. So working on that shift, actually, I think it can answer Happy's question. It can answer chimpanzees, the Great Ape Project's question, but it goes to a challenge, an ingrained part of us. Yes, every waking hour that we spend alive is an hour that we experience human supremacy, so yes, it's ingrained, but the question is, can it be changed? And I think yes, it can be challenged, it can be changed, but it's not going to be changed if we tell the media, no, this is not about cats and dogs and mice, bees, earthworms.
Well, I'm thinking that some days I feel very pessimistic and some days I feel optimistic, because we're definitely in some very interesting times, but we may be in a paradigm shift right now. We're definitely seeing it with humans because, okay, we treat non-human animals horribly, but we don't treat humans much better. And we think we're the best, but we have a problem with gender. We have a problem with race. We have a problem with people from different countries speaking different languages. We don't like people that are different. And people are starting to really rebel. I don't think history has seen what we're seeing now. Of course, I don't know because I didn't live before, or at least I don't remember living before. I'm hopeful that while we're expanding our thoughts on humanity and exploitation, that will kind of spill over into all life on Earth. Seems like a logical extension somehow.
Well, and I also think the other part of this is climate disruption. Climate disruption is forcing us, because we're all impacted by it, it's forcing us to think about how we behave on the face of this planet. And the way we treat life is a big part of this. All these things are connected, and we're going to be figuring this out. Some climate specialists, climate scientists, conservation biologists are finding For example, you remember on YouTube a while back how wolves change rivers? They're finding that predators, if you wipe out, we do, right? Human sprawl, deforestation, right? This is for mainly for animal agribusiness. We are questioning this. This climate is causing us to question deforestation. It is causing conservation biologists to say, look what happens when you take out all the predators off the face of the continent. Look what happens. You've got a lot of herbivores trampling the foliage. And when the foliage is trampled, we can't breathe in the carbon dioxide the way it would naturally. Foliage is changing because there are all these herbivores, right, walking on the foliage, and they're not being moved by carnivores, by our omnivores. So we're looking at and we're finding out, wow, this actually could make a very big difference as to what carbon's not being absorbed. So you see, there are many, many ways that the way we treat animals is connected with emissions and with the destabilization of the climate. We're going to be figuring this out, and we have to do it immediately. Mm-hmm. And I think now we're getting into another reason why doing something species by species, right, or individual by individual, it's not, we don't have time. We don't have time. We need to defend entire biocommunities. We can't be arguing for 30 years with judges on whether even a chimpanzee has personhood to get somewhere with any of this.
We don't have time. I'm just thinking too about the soil as another example. It's like another frontier. It's like another planet almost, but there's so much life in the soil, and we've just been spilling all of these biocides. I call them now. I don't call them pesticides and herbicides anymore. They're biocides. The soil is dying. The soil has the capacity to take in all of this carbon that we're throwing out into the atmosphere, but it can't when it's not healthy, when there isn't life inside of it. And we're starting to learn.
We are starting to learn, and you're bringing up that we've got to do this quickly. See, if we're going to have a paradigm change, it's going to happen quickly, because it's either that, right, or we don't learn. Mm-hmm. Well, we need to learn that we're not the focal point of Earth's great biocommunity. We are participants in it. We were born in it, but we're not the master species. That's what Cormac Cullinan calls it, the master species. We need to challenge that idea. We need to go there, because if we don't, all that we knew is going to be gone.
Well, if we don't, it'll be difficult for some of us who are around when the climate gets very uncomfortable and unlivable. But then humanity will be gone. And is that a bad thing? The earth will clean herself up and move on. But
that's our choice. I mean, what do we want, right? What do we want? Do we want to be hooked off the stage by Earth? Do we want to be spat off? I mean, is that what we want? Because we could do that. Or we could stick around and try to become respectful contributors to a biocommunity. Now, Elon Musk thinks there's the third choice.
Oh, to go somewhere else.
Go somewhere else and start over with our very bad attitudes and see how that works out.
Yeah, that's not a good idea. When you just pee and poop all over one planet and then take off and start putting your shit somewhere else. That's not a very good idea.
We're laughing, but we're crying.
Well, we have been talking for a while now, Lee. So I'm just, let's just go back to Happy for a moment. When I was young, my parents took my sister and I to the Bronx Zoo, and it was a fun place to go. There was, I think my sister's a couple years older than me. I don't even think I was around when my parents brought her when she was really young, and she was wearing this red coat. And they took the red coat and kind of put it on the fence where the elephants were. And this one elephant came and picked up the red coat and swung it around. I think the coat had seen better days after that. But we have this memory of the Bronx Zoo and the elephant that swung my sister's red coat around. And I, for a long time, never saw that story for what it really was. That elephant didn't belong there. How long do elephants live? Do you know?
This particular one has lived at the Bronx Zoo for 45 years.
Yeah,
and I think 7 years before that lived in the United States. So that would put Happy at something like 52 years old. They live a long time.
Right. So Happy wasn't the elephant that swung my sister's red coat. It had to be an elephant that was there a little longer. So you just said the beginning of the program that the courts just decided yesterday.
Yes.
I'm not sure what their reasoning was and if they could even explain themselves in the brief, but and maybe you know. But had it gone the other way, what would have happened?
If they
recognize Happy as a person? Happy would have moved to a sanctuary, and then Steve Wise would keep going with the other cases, and
exactly.
Step by step, little by little, chimps and elephants, and moving very slowly along.
That's right. That's right. The rationale that the majority wrote, the majority opinion of why they decided against this case, they had a number of reasons, and that's what you'll find in majority and dissents. You'll find that they lay out the various reasons. And that way, future judges can look through them and decide which were the strongest and which were not. So the majority wrote that, well, no, Happy's not a person for the purpose of habeas corpus because we've never done it that way before. That was, of course, prominent. There were several other arguments, including the majority called the dissents picked up on a theme that the litigants put forward, that if we recognize abused women and children, if we recognize slaves and we're able to extend personhood or specifically habeas corpus to them in certain situations, should we not be able to do the same here? The dissent picked up on that. The majority did not like that line of argument and called it odious. And I'd like to go to the odious for a moment, because one of the concerns about personhood cases like Happy's, is that, basically paraphrasing what people who don't want these cases to go forward say is, well, isn't that terrible that you're basically comparing an animal to a slave, or a woman, and the animal advocates continually talk about why when we talk about emancipation, we have to look for prototype cases, and that's where they are, and that it's not meant to be offensive. And these are played out over and over. And I'd like to posit that we don't need to keep involving ourselves in arguments that offend people. And one major reason why is because animal personhood is not the same as human rights. These are two actually different questions. And the big reason why is this. If you've got a human being enslaved and you have a case, and of course, yeah, it is, what the hell? I mean, why are people in these vulnerable situations where they need somebody to argue their cases, right? Anyway, once the human being is released from enslavement, what happens? What happens when the human being attains personhood? Generally, ideally, the freed person is able to recognize their full potential within humanity, right? That's what the case is for. Animal rights cases can't do that. Animals aren't trying to get into our society. Animals, I think, if we're going back to Catherine McKinnon and ask what they could say, and we need to think about this a lot more, how do we stop ourselves from trying to speak for other animals? But I think in general, we can agree, I hope we can agree, that they would like to not be exploited by us, that they would prefer not to be taken out of their habitat and out of their own ancestral communities, right? If that's the case, then they're trying to bring them into human law, to human society, isn't going to get them what we hope for them.
So we are almost at the end of the hour, and yeah. I just opened up this can of worms here, just because this is a big topic. The reason why they decided not to give Happy personhood. And there's a couple of things I just wanted to say, and then maybe we could wrap it up. But one is, I don't think these judges have the balls to do something like that. They don't want to be responsible for starting the wheels in motion with giving non-human animals personhood, more rights, recognized. I think that's part of the problem. I'm not going to do this. It sounds interesting to me, but I'm not going to approve this. And the other thing is this idea that giving non-human animals the ability to live their lives by comparing them somehow to us, and by humans finding this repulsive, that we shouldn't be comparing them to us because we're just so much better, is a serious problem that really needs to change. We need to be able to see animals that are not human, not as better and worse, but as you've said all along during this program, that they're on this planet and they deserve to live their lives as their species should live in their habitat. But they're in our world, and we need to litigate that. That's a lot, and we don't have any more time.
Oh, yeah, you just brought up so much. I wonder if I could just say 2 sentences to
please.
Each of those 3 things.
Yeah.
Let me try.
Okay.
You just said 3 things. Let me try to put 2 sentences after each. Okay. First, you're talking about the slippery slope, and you're talking about no judge wants to be the first one to open the floodgates and let all this litigation. Of course, yes, that's right, and that is really the psychology behind this decision not to find a personhood for Happy. That's right. Second, you're talking about comparing. Okay. The issue is, are we comparing non-human beings to human beings, and isn't that offensive? Well, I don't think we need to go there, because human rights is one thing, where if you get rights for humans, humans can reach their full potential in human society. Animal rights is something else, because they never will reach their full potential in human society. It'll always boil down to who handles them in which way and their standards of confinement. As long as they're in human society, they are not free. Okay. Third, you said, we need to litigate this way because this is what we've got. This is the law we've got, so we need to start somewhere. Okay. I think we need to start over. And I think we need to start over. And I think we need to litigate, but I think the locus of animal liberation is has to be in habitat. It has to be, we've got to talk about the remaining free spaces where they can actually live to their full potential, which is life on their own terms.
Well, that's a great way to sum this hour up.
Okay.
Yeah, we need to start over.
You asked some damn good questions, Personhood class.
Thank you. Well,
you should be the media.
Yeah.
You should be the media.
Thank you. Well, the problem is the few times I have been on a program or asking questions, they cut the good stuff. No, we can't have people hearing that. Yes, Lee Hall, thank you for joining me. We are going to pick this up very soon because there's so much more to talk about. And I like talking to you.
Wonderful.
Okay.
I love talking to you. This is great.
Thank you so much for joining me on It's All About Food. Everybody, have a delicious week.